While in the BVIs, you will hear many a sailor ask for a painkiller. And we're not talking about aspirins. We're talking about a killer cocktail.
Slave, here's to the skipper of our motley sort that steers us from trouble at sea and not port.
So, if you find yourself at Marina Quay, then you have to have a Pusser's painkiller. But first, we had to ask, what's in a painkiller? And who better to tell us than Mr. Charles Tobias himself, owner of Pusser's Rum.
And the Pusser's painkiller? That is probably the finest rum drink in the world today. It started right over here in Joost Van Dyke at the Soggy Dollar Bar. What is it? It's 4 parts pineapple, 1 part orange juice, 1 part cream of coconut. And we have a number 2, number 3, number 4. Number 2 ounces is Pusser's rum, number 3 is 3 ounces, number 4 reserved for men only, or kings as we call them, or captains. 4 ounces Pusser's rum. Here in the BVI, we don't allow women to drink those. They don't like it much, but we work it out. Navy rums are very flavorful and very rich, and much more of a powerful taste to them. And there really isn't anything else like it. And it's the only rum that I know that you can mix with all kinds of fruit juices and other wonderful things that are good for you, and that flavor still punches through. And the name Pusser's, hell, is nothing more than a corruption of the word purser. In the Royal Navy, the purser was called the Pusser. Everything that came from the purser who controlled the ship's stores was called Pusser, and it still is today. And another name for this stuff, Nelson's blood. The Battle of Trafalgar, legend has it that Nelson's body, of course the great admiral, the greatest admiral ever known in the history of sea fighting, took down 19 Spanish ships to not a single British vessel at the Battle of Trafalgar on October 21st, 1805. His French sniper nailed him when he was standing there on the quarterdeck. He's a cocky little guy, had his medals all over him. He's lying on the deck and mortally wounded, and they took him below, and he said, "Don't let them throw me overboard." It was customary in those days to throw the mortally wounded and the dead over the side, and they didn't. They took him back to England, and they preserved him in a very, very large cask of Pusser's rum. And they took him out, and the rum was gone, but the body was pickled. My God, where did it go? And they found a little hole at the base of the cask, and the Jack Tars, the sailors, the Jack Tars, had drank all the rum, and thereby drank of Nelson's blood. And that's another name for Pusser's rum. Even today, they allude to it as Pusser's rum is Nelson's blood. And how good is it? Well, it won the gold medal 2001 as the world's best dark rum at the International Wine and Spirits Festival in London. That makes it pretty good. There are a lot of other rums there, but there's only one Pusser's, which represents 3 centuries and a lot of drinking.
One reason boaters love the BVIs is because there are so many great places to visit and enjoy that are only a few hours sail from each other, which translates to no long passages between stops, making it a favourite for families. One such stop is Marina Quay, a small paradise just off the coast of Beef Island and the home of Pusser's rum.
You know, Pusser's Marina Quay is just one of the great little idyllic islands in the world. Every part of the world has 1 or 2 places that are special. And I'd say in the Caribbean, this is probably the special island. And it's only 8 acres, surrounded by a coral reef and that encloses a lovely lagoon down there. The lagoon's about 3-4 feet deep. It was settled the first time by Rob and Rhodey White, who came here in 1937, and they built a house here. He was a Naval Academy graduate. Newlyweds. Can you imagine what they found here in those days? So they came to this little island, and they came down here, and they had their honeymoon here, and they stayed here, and they built a little house up there. And of course, the war came along, and he was recalled back to the Navy and went on active duty in 1940, served the war in the Pacific. After the war, came back, and he and Rhodey tried to get back together. It didn't work out. Somehow he lost the island. He hadn't properly filed title to it, and somebody screwed him, and then they separated. He became quite a writer. You know, he wrote Two in the Isle and Our Virgin Island, which is a book on their life on Marina Quay. She passed on, and then He died a couple of years back, but their spirit is everywhere about this place. Even tonight, you know, every night you come here as the sun goes down, you feel this place and the music and the fun and the people up there all drinking their painkillers. So it's all about the sea and tradition and rum and drinking and grog and the painkiller. And that great place out there, that Sir Francis Drake Channel, all the great ships that have crossed up and down there, and they've never left their mark as man has on the land. They're all out there, they've all been there, and you feel them here in this kind of place. That's what's so great about it.
This is a story of the sea and of ships and of the men who sailed in them. Wooden ships and iron men they were, billowing sails and frigates and running fast against the wind. Britannia ruled the waves with the British Royal Navy and her sailors. They were tough in those days, hard as ship's biscuits. Life on board was harsh. Men were at sea for years against all odds. It took a rare kind of courage to brave uncharted waters with monsters of the deep, and sometimes on board too. There was deprivation, disease, harsh discipline, and death at your elbow. It was more than a 9-to-5 job. Of course they got paid, but it wasn't what you and I would call a salary. Well, you might ask, why did so many stick it for so long? Love of the sea, perhaps? A desire for adventure? Maybe. The answer lies partly in this bottle. A bottle containing 3 centuries of naval history. The Pusser's rum. For the daily issue of half a pint of the finest rum went a long way to compensate for the terrible hardships that sailors endured. It all started around 1655 with the capture of Jamaica, when the Royal Navy started to issue rum to its men. Until then, beer had been the shipmates' drink on board, but with long voyages it often didn't keep well. Rum, however, did. It was easier to store, and its reviving powers were even more welcome than beer. So began a great naval tradition. Twice a day, the daily ration or tot of rum was issued to seamen in a ceremony that lasted for the next 300 years. The rum was collected from the ship's stores, under the purser's control. As it was issued by him, it was called the purser's rum. But over time, the word purser was corrupted to purser, hence the name Pusser's rum. Originally, it was served neat, but half a pint of neat rum didn't make for good discipline on board ship, and in 1740, the tradition of mixing it with a quart of water to half a pint of rum started at the instigation of Admiral Vernon to prevent drunkenness on board. His nickname was Old Grog, from the grogram coat that he wore, and thus the watered-down rum became known as grog. It was so valuable a commodity on board ship that a drink from a mate's rum ration was a sign of great favor, worth more than money. In time, rum became a second currency, with a language of its own. Sippers meant a small, polite sip. Gulpers meant a large swallow. And sandy bottoms was an invitation to finish off whatever was left in a friend's mug. The daily tot continued through the 18th century, the 19th century, even through the 2 world wars of this century, right up until the 31st of July, 1970. Black Tot Day. On that day, the rum ration came to an end in the Royal Navy. It was the end of one tradition, but the beginning of another, because now the Pusser's rum is available again. But this time, not just to serving officers and men in the Royal Navy, but to all of us. And now the Royal Navy rum money goes into today's Royal Navy Sailors Fund for naval charities, with a substantial royalty from each bottle of Pusser's rum too. So the Pusser's rum continues a centuries-old tradition as the only rum prepared to exactly the same Admiralty recipe and standards as it always has been. It's a unique blend of 6 luscious Caribbean rums, each one specially selected for its individual smoothness, flavor, color, and mellow depth. And it's still blended to the Admiralty strength of 95.5 degrees proof spirit. You can sip it on its own with some ice, in true Royal Navy fashion, mixed with 2 parts of water, the real grog, or as any one of dozens of wonderful cocktails. That's the story of the Pusser's rum. A blend of 3 centuries and 6 rums, as much a part of Royal Navy tradition as the sea itself.